Well, hi, and welcome back to Parish and Pub. It's been a couple weeks since I've been able to work on a new video, and I'd like to say that that's an anomaly and not going to be a regular thing, that the last couple of weeks were just an unusually busy and exhausting time, and that I should have the space and margins to more regularly put up content going forward, but I'm afraid that might not be the case. I'm afraid that it's been a pretty standard fortnight of 40 plus hours of work during the week, around an hour of commuting every day, trips to the grocery store, trips to the hardware store, various other errands, cooking dinner, chores around the house. But this isn't an excuse-making session or a vent session, although it does feel good to kind of vent. This is actually the point of what I want to talk about in this video. One of the central core themes of the Parish and Pub project, actually. It's the concept of work as having displaced leisure as our primary activity, and how that's exactly inverse to how it ought to be for both personal and societal flourishing. On my very first video, I opened up with a quote from the philosopher Josef Pieper, and I want to return to him now. Tell me if this sounds to you at all relevant. Everywhere there is a feeling of strain, of being overwrought and overdone. And this fatigue is only relieved in appearance by the breathless amusements or the brief pauses that punctuate its course. Newspapers, a cinema, a cigarette. Now, this quote comes from Pieper's book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, published in 1947 in Germany during that reconstruction of the country. Though I think it almost resonates more with us today, arguably, if instead of newspaper you substituted 24-hour news cycle, and instead of cinema you said, the myriad forms of entertainment we get from our various screens. And while there's certainly a critique there for the endless news or the technologies that abuse our psychology and suck us in, this video is more about the thing that drives us to take refuge in those things in the first place, that drives us to mind-numbing distractions, to dissociation, to over-medication, to even depression and hopelessness. It's the deeper issue that robs us of all of our time, energy, and spirit. It's the world of total work, and it's the enemy of human thriving and cultural flourishing, and the primary object of critique in Pieper's book. I need to say from the outset, as Pieper does, that this is not a complaint about work in general and a defense of laziness. We need to be clear about what the terms/ideas of work and leisure mean to Pieper, and not just him, since his argument is really just a restatement of older medieval and classical ideas. Work, to the Greek and Latin philosophers and theologians, and within Pieper's argument, is not equated with activity or effort, or indeed as any positive in the grammatical sense, but instead has a negative prefix, both in Greek, askolia, and in Latin, negotium. So askolia and negotium, meaning work, laborious work, was the negation of something positive. Skole in Greek and otium in Latin. We'll stick to the Greek since that's what Pieper does. So what does skole, the Greek word, mean? It's the positive activity that in the English version of Pieper's book is translated as leisure. So we really do have to banish this idea that may be lingering in our minds that leisure means inactivity, idleness, laziness, or even just like simple rest. Because in this context, it doesn't. It means a state of mind and being that allows us to contemplate, celebrate, engage in activities not driven by utility or necessity. It's rooted in an openness to the world, the higher purposes of life, and to the divine, enabling us to transcend material concerns and engage with rational, moral, intellectual, aesthetic, and philosophical concerns. Because as Aristotle thought, the highest form of happiness, eudaimonia, is found in contemplation, theoria, which is made possible only by, or is rather almost synonymous with, skole, leisure. So with this positive conception of leisure, we can see why work, labor, ascolia, is almost the exact opposite of it, the negation of it, the thing preventing you from engaging in it. It's certainly, necessary, and there's no doubt about that. And while it was a little easier for the ancient Greek philosophers and men of renown in that society to look on labor as something unambiguously undesirable, since they often had slaves to do all that sort of thing for them, the Christian medievals sort of moderated the attitude toward labor a bit as a praiseworthy duty to be accomplished. It's something that is necessary, and as a duty, there's a moral good in achieving it, though it was still subordinated to the higher privileged activities of prayer and contemplation. Ora et labora, pray and labor, became the motto and summation of the way of life for the Benedictine monastic order, which had a massive role in forming the soul of Western Christendom. The desire to find balance in the necessary labor that almost everyone in the long Middle Ages of Western Europe would have had to do just to survive, with the classical idea of scholae, was indeed a very Christian impulse, reflecting both the acknowledgement of the old Adamic curse post-Eden situation of having to work the earth filled with thorns and thistles, but also of the universal redemption in Christ and the call of every man, woman, and child to be perfect and to become saints. This balance of prayer and contemplation on the one hand, and the noble duty to labor for one's family and community on the other, was always a challenge to keep, but it was at least held up as an ideal. Leisure maintained the preeminence morally, metaphysically, and socially. At least until that revolution that would kick off the beginnings of modernity, what we call the Reformation now. Around this time, there were some new ideas of work that began forming. According to sociologist Max Weber, they had their root in some novel theological concepts. The idea was that for the reformer John Calvin and those who latched onto his ideas, only a certain percentage of the human population was predestined by God for his favor, and that those fortunate enough who were predestined not only had the assurance of ultimate salvation, but also proof in this life of God's favor on them, often in the form of worldly goods and stability. And as people noticed, the only way to assure that you stood out above your neighbors in worldly goods and security was often to work a fair bit harder to acquire them. In an ironic twist, Protestants, who accused Catholics of believing they had to do good works in order to earn their own salvation, now were doing hard work in order to prove theirs. Whether this theory fully or only partially explains the phenomenon, what certainly did happen between the late 16th century and today, and tellingly most thoroughly in majority Protestant countries, was that the balance between leisure with its prayer, contemplation, and other non-utilitarian activities of festivity and celebration, the liberal arts, artis liberalis, and a general free and uninhibited engagement with the good, the true, and the beautiful was sacrificed more and more in favor of a new ideology of total work, where human worth is measured by productivity and efficiency. But this utilitarian view actually undermines the dignity of the human person by robbing us of the engagement with the most profound and meaningful aspects of this world and with our own existence within it. There are a ton of problems that result from the flipping of valuing work and ultimately material enrichment over the spiritual and intellectual enrichment that comes with leisure. In a world dominated by work, a person's value is measured only by their productivity, by what they produce, how efficiently they function, and how much they contribute economically. People are seen less and less as human beings with intrinsic worth, and more as functionaries whose primary role is to labor and build worth of a monetary nature. And if a person's value is tied only to work, then the unemployed, the elderly, or those who engage in non-utilitarian activities such as artists, musicians, philosophers, or monks, they still exist, are perceived as valueless. And for those who can work, they're constantly made to feel guilty for engaging in non-utilitarian activities because everything must be justified in terms of work. Those activities can only be justified, the non-utilitarian ones, by the world of total work as ways to recharge the human functionaries because their software and hardware, it's grudgingly admitted, still stubbornly requires things like rest and recess. In a world of total work, philosophy becomes useless since it doesn't directly contribute to economic productivity. Education becomes merely vocational. Instead of teaching people how to think or teaching them about the world, education is reduced to training them for jobs. Science becomes purely technological. Instead of pursuing knowledge for its own sake, science is now valued only when it leads to technological or economic advancement. Worship, one of the most ancient and indelible of human activities, in a world of total work, is either ignored or commercialized. Festivals lose their meaning, and holidays, traditionally holidays were times of sacred rest and participation in the transcendent, but in the world of total work, they're just extended weekends for consumerism. Spiritual receptivity diminishes and is even lost in some, as a work-dominated mindset prevents people from being open to grace, mystery, divine reality. The world of total work, of course, leads to burnout and anxiety, but also a loss of meaning in life. When life is reduced to work, people struggle to find meaning beyond their job titles and economic worth. They end up alienated, not only from the deeper and richer aspects of the world and of others, but also of themselves. Without leisure to reflect, they become disconnected from their inner selves, from their own previous curiosities, their hopes and fears, their inner fragile ideas that need care and patience to raise to maturity in the consciousness. They're made less than they could be, cut off from realizing their deeper and fuller potentials, their truer selves. These are all just some of the problems we could go on articulating about the world of total work. But like we saw, total work, the oversaturation of labor, is primarily a problem of negation. So next time, I'm going to look at the positive vision for what all a robust prioritization of leisure could mean for us. Far from being a substitution of empty downtime for productive labor, we'll see that it would actually be a substitution of fertile fruit-bearing time instead of the unnatural excessive monocropping of total work. And I hope to see you back here as we explore that next time on Parish and Pub. Take care.